Hey everyone, my name is Eric Anderson. I am a BSN, RN, and a student DNP at Jacksonville State University, and this is my extreme makeover. Quick table of contents, just kind of what's going to be covered in this PowerPoint presentation. Learning outcomes, miscommunication in the workplace, my example, our standard cafeteria water cooler conversations, reflect and rewrite, how I would change the story, and conclusion. In my almost 4 years now working in a 770 bed facility, there have been many instances where communication could have made a major difference in how a situation was handled. Our unit, the cardiac ICU, is over 100 staff with varying personalities, and I'll share a story of miscommunication along with a typical atmosphere of the unit. Outcomes are basically just from our Module 5 student learning outcomes, which is ways to facilitate individual and organizational communication patterns, applying strategies that leaders can use to support effective communication, and reflect on how, as leaders, we can use our words to leverage relational practices. Basically, the story covers a situation where we had a miscommunication about pay, our water cooler talk, and how it led to basically where we have a severe nursing shortage. There was a staffing incentive pay plan that was put forth by the hospital CEO, where if you picked up an extra shift a week, so we get standard 312s for full-time employees, if you picked up one extra 12-hour shift a week, you would get paid time and a half plus $16. It wasn't communicated in email. It was just simply added as an anecdote in our safety huddle. I'm one of the charge nurses on our unit, one of those four, and we were just instructed to say, hey, if you pick up a shift, you get time and a half plus $16, which led to people picking up shifts and people realizing that the pay did not equate to time and a half plus the $16, which in turn turned into people realizing they weren't being compensated fairly, felt like they were being lied to and cheated out of money, which led to them searching for other avenues of employment or doing some travel nursing. According to Davidson 2016, grand organizational plans often come into conflict with local emergent themes. This happened to be one of those emergent themes. We were just really short. We didn't have enough staff to cover the units, especially the ICUs, during COVID. So they were trying to find ways to incentivize staff to come in and pick up. And there was no clear explanation, no mass email sent out about the pay change. And they basically just were emergently instructing these charge nurses to say, okay, this is what if you pick up, this is what you're going to get paid. There were no expectations that really hit. The intentions were there, but the strategic planning and being enacted militantly, it really hampered our team dynamic, and it caused a lot of great nurses to leave the unit. Not just the unit in general, but some of them even left nursing forever. They don't want to be a nurse anymore because of how unfairly they felt they had been treated. Most of the themes of our lunch, water cooler conversations were mostly negative. Everybody felt that they had been cheated out of money, that we were hiring 30, 40, 50 agency staff between day and night shift, obviously, to cover what was originally a 22-bed cardiac ICU into a 47-bed CVICU. The rooms were spaced really far apart. There was no team dynamic, and the agency staff and the travel staff were getting paid far more money than the people who worked on the unit, who were able to take all the devices like ECMO and LVADs and CRT and things that agency staff couldn't take because they hadn't been trained on it, for far less money. The incentive pay was paid out incorrectly, or maybe looking back at it, it was miscommunicated. We were just basically told we have a nightly staffing huddle, we go in and all the charge nurses sit down and talk and listen to the overhouse supervisor, and the overhouse supervisor simply says, hey, the CEO has rolled out this plan emergently to go ahead and pay staff time and a half plus $16 to incentivize them to come in and pick up and work extra. I personally picked up to 6 days a week while in school to be able to afford to pay for school. I mean, and I'm not the only one. There were lots of us who were working to go through our doctorate, nurse practitioner programs or getting ready to go to nurse anesthesia school, and they decided to go ahead and pick up extra and put that money away. And when it was not paid out correctly, that really made a big issue. So when we would have lunch together and, as one of the charge nurses, I would sit and have conversations with people. There was a lack of faith in the organization. They felt they had been lied to and cheated, and it really created a negative atmosphere. And the workload didn't equate to what we were getting paid, especially in comparison to like our travel and agency staff, which I'm very thankful for, because without them, our unit would not be able to function. The mission of our organization has always been described as one that prioritizes patients and productivity. We want to be able to turn out cardiac cases, as many as possible, as fast as possible, recover the heart cases, send them to the floor, and send them home. The caseload did not slow down in any way, shape, or form, which is why they added this incentive pay for you to pick up. If you wanted to pick up an extra shift and help, prevent a triple or charge nurses in staffing, you were able to do so. We rarely had face-to-face meetings. We would have phone call conversations, or just, 3 or 4 nurses plus a charge nurse having communication with, unit manager or educators or anybody who was, higher up than the charge nurse. And it really affected the team dynamics as well, because not only were the rooms really far apart and, stuff like that, where we weren't able to just simply communicate with each other from one room to the next, it was, really hard to have any open communication between all staff and the unit manager. We felt very undervalued, and because there was no universal way of communicating how this staffing incentive was going to work, we all felt like we weren't valued. We didn't have any involvement in the pay change. There was no transparency on how the new incentive rate would be paid out on our paychecks, which was probably an oversight, just because there was no universal way of them describing it. The incentive pay rates turned out to be $16 an hour on top of your base pay, unless you picked up at the end of your pay schedule, which then put you in overtime, and then you were able to earn your time and a half. Patterns of relating. We didn't have a lot of accountability, transparency, or respect. It felt like we were lacking in the transparency and respect aspect, probably predominantly. One of the things that I really attributed when I am in charge and helping work with staff is I'm making sure I'm giving and receiving information as best I can, as accurately as I can, as honestly as I can. Humility, so when I don't know something, I'm going to make sure that they know that, hey, I'm not sure, but I want to dig deeper, which is what I did with this, and ended up getting a lot of our issues resolved. And then being flexible, because sometimes, people don't pick up for the staffing incentive, and you got to make it work. If I was going to reflect and rewrite the story, I would just change it from the very beginning. Instead of just a quick huddle, emergently putting out a call for incentive pay for, an extra shift or overtime with a dollar amount, I would change the delivery aspect of it. Instead of telling the charge nurses, hey, this is what you're going to tell your staff in your safety huddle, I would send a very clear email, which relates to the, reflectional part of this. And the relational part of organizational leadership is everybody has access to work email. Why not just send out an email with an exemplar of how the paycheck will look, direct guidelines on how on how you picking up an extra shift would work. If it's the beginning of the week, it's not going to be overtime, but you'll get overtime at the end. And then showing that the breakdown of the paycheck is not just, hey, you pick up a shift, that shift is immediately time and a half plus $16. It's describing, hey, instead of you seeing your overtime pay as time and a half, it's not going to show up like that. It's going to show up as an hour number instead of a dollar number. And this is where like kind of the 4 domains of leadership come into play. You have the executing, influencing, relationship building, and strategic thinking. The executional aspect of this was one of the big problems with how we implemented the change of staffing incentive pay. It was just a very quick, emergent, please put this out there, versus sending a mass email, a very clear, concise explanation. And it would have changed the whole dynamic of like the aspect of us losing nurses, retaining nurses. I think people would have felt more involved. And that also brings in, in fact, the influencing and the relationship building, because honesty and transparency just bring in the relationship aspect, and the strategic thinking part of it comes into play when you're implementing this and you want to tell everybody to go ahead and pick up extra shifts. You want them to know that you've made a plan for how they're going to get compensated for it. Communication has never been our best quality, so that's obviously the one that I would change. Make sure that the communication is very collaborative, and it allows responses to the gestures. So like they're extending their hand with incentive pay. Make sure that you reciprocate with how is it going to be paid out, and then you get a response of exactly how it's going to be paid out. Reflecting and rewriting back to our lunch break talks would involve constructive and uplifting words instead of negativity, where people were trying to find other jobs and change careers even. And we could have been very excited to pick up incentive and extra shifts. The leaders adopt the relational approach from big to small in order to make, big decisions like this where it has to come with pay. It's not just a unit-based change. And then to improvise, but within limits. And don't panic to roll out a new pay scale without a full, clear explanation. The organization would have served better to openly disclose the information regarding the new pay scale, clearly written, maybe with an example of a paycheck to each employee's email.